Welcome back to Proxamer, everybody, and today we're going to be reviewing the Imperial Armor Craftworld Eldar units from Forgeworld, and I have to say, guys, I'm pretty impressed. I think the unit lineup is really good. In the past, typically, Forgeworld units have been, well, a notch below the Codex or Index units in terms of, competitiveness and viability in regular games. But this time around, I think they did a really good job balancing these. And I'm impressed, I have to say. When I first thought these rules were going to come out, I thought they were going to just heavily miss the mark on a lot of these. And they didn't. And a lot of them really look quite competitive and something you can definitely play in semi-competitive games, or some of them even tournament level play. And I'm going to tell you what those are in just a second, but I will say this, I'll give you a little bit of a hint. If you guys like the Hornet, you're going to love this review because the Hornet is fantastic. And I'm very impressed with its rules. So without further ado, let us go ahead and dive right into it. But first, just a quick announcement. I have set up a free Patreon trial for those of you who want to participate in our community Discord server. And this is in honor of the channel reaching 1,500 subs, which is a really cool milestone. Supporters on Patreon get full access to the Discord server and also can ask questions and advice from me or others in the community, which is really helpful. I think it's a really great way to help new Eldar players who aren't really sure what they want to build or where they want to go with their lists. It's also a great way for more experienced players to get second opinions on their lists. Because as you guys know, me included, trust me, a second opinion is always worth its weight in gold. Now, here's the thing about this trial. It's totally free. You can cancel at any time before 7 days and you will not be charged any money. The goal here is not to just ramp up Patreon subscriptions, right? The goal here is to get people involved in the Discord community, and that's why I'm activating the free trials. So many of you might be asking, well, Proxyhammer, why don't you just put the Discord link on one of your community posts or videos, and that way everybody can access the Discord server and we don't have to do the free trial? To those of you wondering why I'm doing it this way, it's very simple. I do not want our Discord channel to be the subject of a bunch of bots and the victim of a bunch of trolls, hackers, and other miscreants. Monkai trolls or whatever. So, yes, this does happen and will happen if I put the Discord link where everybody can access it. So, trust me, this is the safest way to do it to make sure the community remains troll-free and bot-free. So yeah, give it a shot. Go ahead and look at the links in the description and click on one of those and you can start your free trial. And that will get you access to the Discord server. The Discord link is, of course, in one of my Patreon posts, so you do have to at least be on the free trial to access it. Okay, so let's take a quick overview of the video today. We're going to be looking at an in-depth look at all the Forgeworld datasheets, and we're going to analyze them. And I'm going to give you my thoughts on the Forgeworld units and the overall takeaways. We're also going to be looking at some of the strategies with some of those units. So here are the point values. If you need to look at them really quick, you can go ahead and pause the video, obviously, and just take a look. But the point values look pretty reasonable for Forgeworld overall. Forgeworld units have typically been expensive and their rules have been kind of lackluster in comparison with the Codex. Luckily, all of our units made it, and none of them, to my knowledge, also moved to Legends, which is awesome because we have had Forgeworld units move to Legends before, so I'm glad we kept the roster that we did. So we're going to go ahead and start off today's video with Earlith. He's 105 points. He gives the unit of Specters +1 to hit, just like all Phoenix Lords. He gives a -1 leadership modifier to battle shock tests and leadership tests when within 6 inches of enemy units. He has a pretty solid ranged profile at 3 attack, strength 8, AP -2, and damage 4, which is really good. I think he's a really good Phoenix Lord. He's definitely better than Magan Ra, I believe. And he's quite a bit cheaper. The problem I have with him is that his ability is, just like Magan Ra, is just not that good. It really doesn't help out a lot. Battle shock tests are great, but this guy needs to be within 6 inches to do it. It's just not good. I think he would have been a lot better if he forced the unit he shot at to be at -1 to leadership and battle shock tests. But unfortunately, it's just a 6-inch aura, and this is just not something you're going to want to use. It's definitely going to be really hard to utilize. Obviously, he's priced at a level that is pretty cheap, so if you do want to take him anyway and just kind of ignore the ability, it's not the biggest loss, but it does kind of suck to have an ability that's probably never going to go off in a game. If you're playing him right, that is. Obviously, Shadow Specters want to be in the back. They want to be using their ability to jump in and out of cover and shoot the enemy and not, be in their faces, tanking hits and stuff like that. The next up on the list is the Specter Wraith Knight. Now, I don't even know if I pronounced that right, and I'm sorry if I didn't. If someone wants to let me know how to pronounce that in the comment section, please do. So, the Specter Wraith Knight is 385 points, which is basically the same as a regular Wraith Knight, but tiny bit more expensive. Has an ability that allows it to go back into reserves once per game at the end of your opponent's turn, much like the Swooping Hawk ability. So that's a pretty useful ability to have in your back pocket, but because you can only use it once a game, it doesn't have infinite utility like the Swooping Hawks do with their Skyleap. It can be geared toward anti-large with a Melta 2 weapon or anti-infantry with devastating wounds, which is, again, pretty good, but it's probably not as good as the heavy Wraith Cannon is now. That may change, though, depending on what they nerf. So we'll have to see about that. So basically, if they make Strands of Fate modified dice, it would kind of feel bad for the Wraith weapons in a way. And maybe this thing would be more of an inclusion in lists that wanted a super heavy that could also, kill infantry. So as of now, it's currently not better than the regular Wraith Knight, but that, again, may change with the balance update. We'll just have to see. It's a pretty good Wraith Knight. It just doesn't have as much durability as the regular one. Instead of the -1 damage, it has that reserve ability where it can basically go back into reserves at the end of your opponent's turn and come out during your turn. So unless you're using some sort of reserve style list where you have a bunch of units coming in and out of reserve, the Wraith Knight is probably the better option for now until the balance update. All right, so let's take a look at Shadow Specters. So Shadow Specters is a unit I'm going to spend some extra time on because, man, are they good. They got a really great glow up this edition. They're only 80 points, which is incredible for what they do. And when I saw this point cost, I thought to myself, these guys have got to be way worse, right? Well, in fact, they're actually not really that much worse. And in a lot of ways, they're actually just straight up better. So they have Deep Strike, they have the Stealth special rule. They had that before, but now Stealth is really powerful because of the indirect fire rule. So if somebody ignores indirect fire penalties, they will still get a -1 to hit. They can also move 6 inches after shooting. So not only can they battle focus again, but they battle focus the full distance, which is absolutely awesome. And to top it all off, they have a very versatile weapon that's good at killing Terminators with a focus shot at strength 6, AP -2, and of course damage 3. I know the AP doesn't sound that good, but it's actually just in the sweet spot to get Terminators to their invulnerable save of 4+. And yeah, they're going to fail 50% of those, and a Terminator is going to be dead for each shot. And this is only an 80-point unit. Their anti-infantry tech is a blast weapon. It's basically like a shuriken catapult, strength 4, -1 AP, and has the blast keyword. So maybe not like a shuriken catapult, maybe more like an Eldar missile launcher, the plasma version. That's pretty powerful as well for clearing out infantry. So if you're going against hordes of infantry, you have an option for that. If you're going against heavy infantry like Terminators, you also have an option for that as well. And if you don't have any Terminator targets or light infantry targets, let's say you just have Space Marines, they're actually not that bad for the cost at 80 points to just shoot Space Marines. And I know that seems really weird, but last edition, these guys were really very target specific. I did a video on these guys where I basically said, yes, these guys are good if you're shooting at the right units. If you're not shooting at Terminators, they're overcosted. And that was a very true fact, because if you weren't shooting at Terminators last edition with these guys, then unfortunately they just weren't going to do the work. I think they were like 26 points a model or something like that, so they were very expensive for the unit. And now they're much cheaper, so you can afford to shoot at regular stuff and still be cost effective, even if you're losing out on that damage 3. But they're really good against Terminators and other 3-wound models as well. They're also cheap enough to where you can take them in a big unit. They have an ability that helps keep them safe built in, so you don't have to use Fire and Fade or anything like that. And of course, you can give them Guide, you can give them Blade Storm and stuff to make them hit even harder. Yeah, Blade Storm might not be the most efficient CP, but if you're buffing them up with stuff, it's still really good. And again, this combos really well into things like Shroud Runners, which have lethal hits. So if you wanted these guys to be able to take out a little bit, heavier targets, they can. I really like these guys a lot. I think they have a lot of versatility in what they can be effective against for their points. They have absolutely incredible mobility. They do also have just speed 12 and fly, which is another thing, so they can really easily get on top of terrain. If you do need that extra AP, they can get on top of terrain and have plunging fire. And then, of course, because of their 6-inch move, you can then just move back down. So a cool thing to do with these guys is set them up right below a 2nd-story ruin, move directly up 6 inches, shoot at something, get plunging fire, and then move down exactly 6 inches again. Now, of course, this will mean that they are open to attack. But if you want to spend a command point, you can. You can use Phantasm and move them 7 inches back behind the obscuring terrain again so that they can't be targeted. And that's really just if you want that extra AP. Normally, you're not going to need it, but in some scenarios, it might be useful for when opponents don't have an invulnerable save, but they do have a good armor save. So again, there's a lot of ways to use these guys. They're very effective for their cost. And wow, what a fantastic unit. I actually think this might be a contender for one of the best aspect warriors in the Codex. Next up is the Hornet. And wow, okay, I at first didn't think the Hornet was going to be that good. I had a lot of reservations about it. But then looking at its datasheet and looking at its point cost, I don't know what competitive list wouldn't try to take at least one of these. So 80 points, which, depending on its rules, may or may not be cost effective, right? But then you look at its rules and you see that it has the ability to deal wounds to models it moves over when it makes a normal move. Now, there's a special little key part here that some of you may have not noticed, but it says when it makes a normal move, and it says every time it makes a normal move. Normal moves happen to be more than just moving in the movement phase. There are 2 abilities that Eldar have which allow your unit to make a normal move as if it were the movement phase. Those are Fire and Fade and Phantasm. Yes, guys, Phantasm does count as a normal move as well. So every time you move over a unit and make a normal move, you roll 6 dice and it does immortal for each 4+ to a unit it moved over. Now, I did a video a long time ago when Swooping Hawks had this ability with their grenade pack. It was one of the first videos I ever did. I took it off my channel because it's really old. It's outdated. It's from 8th edition, for God's sakes, with an 8th edition codex. And basically, it was a strategy about how to maximize the amount of mortal wounds you can deal to an enemy unit by moving over them and dropping those grenades. Basically, this is the same thing the Hornet can do now, except there's no cap to it. So it doesn't matter how big the unit is, you're going to be dealing mortal wounds regardless. So you roll 6 dice, and it does a mortal wound, again, for each 4+, and this can be triggered multiple times, up to 3 times a turn. So this is how you do it. And I'll probably make a video on this later on to illustrate this further, but essentially what you do is you take the Hornet and you move it over an enemy unit in the movement phase at 14 inches. And then you roll 6 dice against it. You'll probably get 3 mortal wounds on average. You could spike for more. You could, whiff and get less. It just depends. But 4+ are really swingy, but even so, on average, you're going to get 3 mortal wounds. Then you shoot the unit. Now, I think the weapons for this thing are either you give it the pulse lasers or the star cannons if you want to go after infantry. My pick for that is the star cannons just because they're a little bit more consistent and have more AP. And if you want this thing to go after big stuff like tanks, you obviously give it the bright lances. That's probably going to be the go-to pick for most people anyway. Then, when you would normally use Fire and Fade, you use this to move over the enemy unit again, dealing another 6 dice worth of mortal wounds, so probably 3 more mortal wounds. Now, this last bit is a little bit risky because if you do want to get that Phantasm in to, again, deal more mortal wounds, your vehicle has to be pretty close to the enemy unit, and that enemy unit has to move in a certain way. Basically, it just honestly has to move in a way that your model can still move over it, which if you were targeting a very fast model that's not destroyed yet, or a very fast unit, it's probably not going to happen. But if they do move and it's a slower moving unit that doesn't really have the capacity to kill the Hornet, then you can move it again over using Phantasm and do another 6 mortal wound damage. So this thing is doing a potential of 9 average mortal wounds a turn on top of its shooting. Now, you won't be using this all the time, but it is a great way to deter opponents from trying to get into your backfield and mess you up in the backfield. So let's say that your opponent uses strategic reserves and brings in a unit of combat Marines, assault Marines or anything like that, Vanguard veterans, to really ruin your backline, destroy your D cannons, destroy everything, and maybe he gives them storm shields or something like that, so they're really tough to take out. Yeah, you could just do the devastating wound critical hit thing with the D cannon and blow them off the table. Obviously, you could do that, right? But I think it's going to get nerfed, so you might not be able to do it for long. We're probably going to see an update at some point this week, basically nerfing Strands of Fate and nerfing that interaction of devastating wounds and, Strands of Fate dice. We'll see, though. We'll see what they do with that. Who knows? But this is a great thing that they're probably not going to nerf to deal mortal wounds. So check this out. He brings in some units behind you. Okay. He's probably not going to get a charge off unless he has some sort of ability. Or he just gets lucky. That's another thing. He could get lucky, get the charge off, kill something. But check this out. The Hornet can then just move over that unit, deal 3 mortal wounds. That's a Marine and a half dead. Shoot it. If you have star cannons, it's probably going to kill probably a couple Marines. If you don't, if you have bright lances, you'll probably kill 1 Marine, which is still pretty decent. Then you fire and fade, you move again. So you move again, you deal another 6. So you're dealing another, 3.5, 1.5 Marines dead worth of mortal wounds. By then, especially if you have other shooting, that Stern Guard squad or Vanguard squad or whatever the hell it was, is probably going to be dead. It has killed its intended target and it's now going to die, and you don't need to worry about it running amok in your backfield. But just in case it's not dead yet, if your Hornet was close enough to that enemy unit, you can then move over it. If they have jump packs, they're probably going to be pretty faster. If they don't have jump packs, they're going to be slow enough at movement 6 to where you can move the Hornet again and just clip the unit. You can, you can move slightly over it. It does have fly, so you can move over enemy units. And then you could just deal the mortal wounds again, dealing even more damage. So that's a pretty powerful tool to have at your disposal, and you can use it offensively as well in conjunction with your bright lances or star cannons to really make sure an enemy unit dies. And then, of course, you don't have to use the Phantasm part of it. That's a little riskier. You could just play it safe and just, roll the 12 dice for mortal wounds and deal 6 mortal wounds. That's still a lot of damage, guys, especially in combination with bright lances if you want to take out a tank, or star cannons if you want to take out infantry. And by the way, by itself, using one of these with Fire and Fade on a Land Raider, if you have strand support, will kill it, right? It will kill it on average rolls. You have a reroll to hit, you have a reroll to wound, you can use Fate dice however you want to manipulate that. And then, of course, with the damage roll, yes, you could high roll 6s, but if you don't have 6s, it's okay because you're also dealing a bunch of mortal wounds to it. So this 80-point model can kill a Land Raider by itself, which is pretty awesome. But just remember, there's been a little bit of a discussion in the community about Fate dice, when you can use them, when it's appropriate. Some people are saying there's nothing from stopping you from rolling the dice and then changing it to your, chosen Fate dice result after you roll it the first time. Because you have a reroll, you can technically change the reroll into whatever you want. I'm not sure that's intended, but I guess if its rules is written and GW didn't say anything about it, it's legal for now. Don't expect it to be legal in this coming data slate. Pretty sure they're going to clarify that that's not doable, that you have to declare before you roll any dice. So just be careful about that. Don't plan your strategy around it because it's probably something that's going to go away. Even so, though, this can pretty much guarantee you that your Hornet is going to be able to kill something big, which is great, right? It's always great to see a small model like this with the proper resources allocated be able to kill something much more expensive. So yeah, the Hornet is fantastic. And again, I don't see many competitive lists running without one, I have to say. Even though it's not as durable as a Warwalker, it can still have 2 Bright Lances. It's faster than a Warwalker, and it has this mortal wound ability, which has a lot of synergy with the stuff that we already have with our, stratagems and things like that. And just as a last kind of ditch thing, it does have tank shock. So it can also tank shock things on top of it. So tank shock also does mortal wounds. This thing is just a mortal wound machine. I swear, it's great. And actually, if you can find one for under $50, definitely pick one up because it's going to be a model that's going to be good for a long time. I've actually been trying to find one myself, but they're so expensive. They're like, if you go on eBay, most of them are like $80 or something like that, which is insane for, the cost. So, if you can find one for cheap at your local game store, definitely pick one up. They're worth it. So moving on to the Lynx. The Lynx is kind of an oddity in that it's a tank that wants to advance quickly and shoot enemy units from new angles. Now, it is pretty good. When it advances, it always moves an additional 9 inches. It is 155 points, which is more expensive than the Prism, but, it makes sense that it would be. The Lynx Pulsar is pretty strong. It has 4 attacks. It's strength 16, AP -3, and damage D6, and it has the assault ability with that weapon. So this is a really fast unit that can advance and shoot for optimal angles on targets, and it has pretty good anti-tank weaponry. Overall, pretty good, pretty solid tank. I don't think I like it as much as the Fire Prism just because the Fire Prism is a little bit of a safer pick. You have linked fire, you can fire through other prisms, and you can do it at safe distances. This seems like it really wants you to just rush forward, get better angles on targets, blow them up, and then possibly be in a worse position for it. Although Fire and Fade does exist, Phantasm does exist, so, you can use this offensively and still get a lot of value about it. It just really depends what kind of counters your opponent has to this tank. It does also come with an invulnerable save, which is really useful. It means that it can survive extra attacks. So I do like this tank. Again, for my particular lists, I probably would prefer Fire Prism. But, if they nerf the Fire Prism really bad, this may be a good alternative choice. And I also know that some of you out there do have a Lynx, and yeah, the Lynx is pretty good, guys. You can feel safe and feel good running this thing because it is pretty decent. And I would say at least in semi-competitive games, this thing can get a lot of value. The Warp Hunter is another model that I think is pretty good. Maybe not the best, but pretty good for its cost. It causes a battle shock test to a unit hit. The D-Flail has a torrent profile and a blast profile. But the blast profile is generally better. The torrent profile just kind of is lackluster. Doesn't have any extra attacks or anything. Just D3 attacks. Having the blast keyword is actually just really good in general to just get those extra attacks. And because it has 24-inch range versus 12, it's going to be better in most scenarios. It has a pretty high strength, pretty high AP on its weapon, and it does devastating wounds as well, being a D weapon. So that's always going to be pretty decent. It does have a limit in its range, though, and I think this is where it really kind of falls off for me, is that 24 inches for a battle tank that you want to keep in your backline with no invul save is going to be a kind of a hard sell, especially when you have something like Fire Prisms, or you just straight up have D cannons. Let's be real here. A single D cannon platform is only 85 points, and just punches a lot harder than this thing at 130. So you are spending a premium on this. It does have mobility and stuff like that. It is a good tank. I would say, if you want to take one of these, it's absolutely fine. You just have to find a way to use it well. I think a good way to use it is actually in reserve. Because in reserve, you can kind of come up with this thing. You can come up behind enemy units, blast them with the D-Flail and also cause battle shock. So potentially, if you're lucky enough, you can get this thing to kill an enemy unit or at least, have it below half strength. You can force it to take a battle shock test in your turn and in their turn in their command phase if they're below half strength. On top of that, you can use a fate dice to charge in, deal tank shock, and hopefully kill that unit. And then if you want to, because the torrent rule is generally not something you use all the time, but it does have a pretty good use in Overwatch because it auto hits. So what you could do is you can spend a command point to do Overwatch, use the torrent profile, and do some extra damage to something that's moving within range, which is also pretty good. And on top of that, again, if you wanted to position it better, you could always use Phantasm on it to basically hamper your opponent's ability to kill it in their turn. However, to achieve all this, you really do need to put it into strategic reserve, and you do need to hold it until at least turn 3 when it can come in on your enemy's back board edge. This ensures that it gets the best positions, and it's the hardest to deal with in the late game. Okay, so that's a pretty good tank. Probably not the absolute best, but it's pretty solid, and there are clever ways to use it. The Nightwing, on the other hand, I have to say is just pretty much garbage. It's 150 points, so for only 10 more points, you can get a Crimson Hunter, and arguably the Crimson Hunter is one of the worst units in the Codex. It's objectively worse than a Crimson Hunter. It has worse weapons with, the Shuriken Cannons and Twin-Linked Bright Lances, so it has less shots against high armor targets. You can't swap the weapons out for anything, so you're kind of just stuck with the Twin Bright Lance and Twin Shuriken Cannon. It's a cool model, but that's about it. It's just bad. It only gets +1 to hit against targets with fly. It doesn't even get +1 to wound like the Crimson Hunter does. It's just generally awful. It has a 5+ invulnerable save, but who cares? Who cares? This thing is paper anyway. It's going to die pretty quickly when it comes into battle. So, yeah, just like with most flyers, this thing sucks, and probably don't use it in games you want to win. It's just not going to be a very good unit for you. Now we're getting to the super heavy element of the Eldar Imperial Armor, and we start off with the Cobra. The Cobra is armed with the Mighty D Impaler, which is quite powerful. It has D6 +3 attacks, Strength 16, AP -4, Damage 4, with Blast and Devastating Wounds to boot. Pretty strong. The unit also has an ability where the unit hit, and every unit within 6 inches takes D3 mortal wounds on a roll of a 5+. That's pretty good if your opponent is packed in a corner or something like that in the beginning of the game. It can definitely deal a lot of extra damage in those scenarios. It also has an invulnerable save, but it's a massive target and it's hard to effectively hide behind obscuring terrain because it has so many wounds. So again, it's just not really going to be that effective in a lot of scenarios. Just because it can't hide, it's very easy to kill, but it does deal a lot of damage. For its cost, I don't think it deals enough. But it is a pretty good vehicle. If you can physically hide it, it is a very good choice. And on top of it all, if you manage to give it fortune, it can be decently durable for its cost. Again, 414 is a high price to pay, but if you give it fortune, it can stay alive a little longer, especially with the help of some fate dice. So if you do want to run this thing, it is very possible. I think it's a decent choice in semi-competitive games. I don't think it's the best choice. Let's just put it that way. And again, you can get 3 fire prisms for the same cost. The Scorpion is pretty much the same thing. It comes in at 410. It's armed with the deadly Scorpion Pulsar, which has 6 attacks, Strength 18, AP -3, and Damage 5, as well as Twin Linked. It will get some damage in against enemy tanks. If it destroys a model, its Deadly Demise procs on a 4+ instead of on a 6, which is pretty cool. But most opponents aren't going to keep that many units close to their big tanks, especially if they have Deadly Demise D6 or something like that. They're just not going to want to do that in general. So it is a strong weapon platform for killing large targets, although it is difficult to keep alive again due to its size and just inability to hide in general. It does have a good weapon, but the weapon, in my opinion, is not good enough for its high point cost. And its ability is definitely kind of suspect in a lot of ways competitively. Okay, so moving on to the Phantom Titan. The Phantom Titan is 2100 points, so you can't field it in regular games, but it is incredibly strong for APOC games, has strong stats, 55 wounds, and a 4+ invulnerable save against range attacks. Its D bombards are insane with D6 attacks each at strength 20, AP -4, and 2d6 damage, with blast and devastating wounds. So pretty strong, basically just a upgraded version of the heavy Wraith Cannon. It has insane melee damage as well with the Wraith Glaive. And obviously, again, you're not going to be bringing it to regular games, but it is pretty good in APOC games. It is a big target, though. And the few APOC games that I was at that this thing was on the table, it basically just died in the first couple turns. So I don't know. It is strong, but I don't have much experience in APOC, so I don't know really how good it is. But it is cool. The Revenant Titan, on the other hand, is only, right? 1,100 points, and it can be run in regular games. It has 30 wounds with 4+ invul against range. Strats cost double CP to use on it, so you can't just use lightning fast reflexes on it for 1 command point. That would be kind of ridiculous. It has really strong ranged weapons that are great at killing infantry or large targets, but it has no devastating wounds, which is fine. I don't really like devastating wounds anyway, to be honest with you guys. I've really always been of the opinion that mortal wounds shouldn't really be in the game at all anyway, except on very, very special characters and stuff like that. It can auto-advance 8 inches and move over 4-inch or less obstructions as if they were not there, so kind of like the Wraith Knight in that way. It's a really awesome model that you can run in regular games, but it's not really competitive. Again, you can run 3 Wraith Knights for this. You know, it's pretty expensive, and it's an absolutely massive target, and it doesn't have that much more durability over other units. It does have toughness 13, which is decent, but there's a lot of weapons out there that are just going to nuke this thing down, right? Hammerheads and stuff like that can just take this thing and just blow it out of the sky. And I do believe they are going to change the towering special rule. So you do have to watch out for that as well. And if, this thing loses towering, or if towering changes so that you can't shoot everything, but they can shoot you, this thing loses a lot of its power. So just keep that in mind. It is a cool model if you want to use, it in regular games, but it's not the most competitive. All right, so on to one of my favorite units of Forgeworld, and that is, of course, the Wraith Seer. The Wraith Seer is 160 points, so it's the same cost as a Wraith Lord. It forces enemy units hit by range attacks to make a Battle Shock test. It has a 5+ invulnerable save, and the Destructor ability, which is essentially a heavy flamer. It has great anti-infantry melee profile. It has anti-infantry 2+ and precision, so it's good at taking out characters, or good at just sweeping aside infantry in general. It can, again, take one of the Eldar heavy weapons, but it can also take a toned down D cannon. Now, they toned it down to the point where I don't actually think it's that good. It has 1 shot, strength 14, AP -4, D6 damage with devastating wounds. It doesn't have blast, I believe, either. And it only has a 24-inch range. So they did tone it down quite a bit. I think the Bright Lance is going to be a better option in general just because of the range. But you may actually want this guy walking up the field at some point to be able to use the Destructor ability, the Heavy Flamer. So it does have solid rules and has fair trade-offs with the Wraith Lord. It has more durability and stuff like that, so it can function better in the mid-board when it wants to in the mid-game. But its ranged weaponry is worse, and arguably its ability to cause a Battle Shock test to a unit hit is also just not that great overall. It is good, it's just not phenomenal. I think the Wraith Lord is probably the better buy because you can get 2 Bright Lances on it, you can get 2 Flamers on it, which basically double the output of any kind of damage this guy can do at range. And on top of that, this guy, of course, has the Wraith Spear, which is good, but the Wraith Lord has the Ghost Glaive, which is also really powerful and better against heavy targets. So yeah, and on top of that, the Wraith Lord also can, gain fate dice for killing units. So I think there's trade-offs here. I don't think the Wraith Lord is just outright better because this thing is tougher with a 5+ invulnerable save. It is better against infantry, no doubt. But the Wraith Lord does have double the ranged weapons this does. So yeah, you're just going to have to think about whether you want your Wraith monster in melee or firing at range. If you want both, then you're probably going to want the Wraith Lord. If you just want something that's more melee oriented and more disruption oriented, you're probably going to want the Wraith Seer. So I am really glad that this thing is viable. I was actually kind of worried that it would just be straight up worse this edition for some reason, because it was pretty good last edition. I thought they were going to nerf it severely. Again, the D cannon has been nerfed severely, but you can give it other options if you want to. Okay, so what are my thoughts and key takeaways from these reveals? So first of all, the Hornet and the Shadow Specters are standouts to me for their extremely good cost and powerful rules. I think those are very competitive units. I would be very surprised to not see these units appear in highly competitive tournament lists. Again, they're priced very effectively. The Hornet is actually 15 points cheaper than the Warwalker and has arguably better abilities, especially for damage. I know Warwalkers are more durable, and that may have, some value in games a lot of the times, especially with Strands of Fate, but the Hornet is very powerful for what it does. Shadow Specters are just really good cost for what they do. They're great at hunting Terminators, but they're low enough in points to where they can shoot other, MEQ style kind of troops and not have too much issue. Because of their lower cost, it's a little bit more viable to do so. With the exception of the Nightwing, everything in the Imperial armor looks pretty fun and playable, which has sometimes been touch and go with Forgeworld units in the past. Most Forgeworld units are not competitive, and they're not even good. So I'm glad that a lot of them are actually, quite decent now. You look at their data sheet and you're like, oh, I could see this running this in a fun game or even a semi-competitive game and doing pretty well with it. If used right? Like, most of these units are not the most optimized competitive units, but that's fine because they're still pretty strong. Of course, except the Nightwing. The Nightwing's just garbage, and honestly, they should be ashamed they even put the rules out for that thing. So overall, I'm really liking a lot of the Forgeworld units, and I'm really excited to use many of them, especially the Hornet and the Shadow Specters. So in conclusion, I'm really satisfied with the way GW balanced the Forgeworld units. Most of them are good in their own ways without outcompeting the units in the index completely. There's a lot of trade-offs there and a lot of, equivalent points and stuff like that. The point cost for most of them seem pretty reasonable as well. Not too far off, not really expensive. The Skatath Wraith Knight, again, I don't even know if I'm saying that right, but is not something like 400 points. Or 450 points. It's only 15 more points than the regular Wraith Knight. And again, I do think we're going to see a bump in the point cost of the Wraith Knight, personally. So we'll see about that. But, they're comparable, right? My personal favorite is also the Hornet, which is only 80 points and has some really cool tricks it can pull off, like dealing multiple rounds of mortal wounds a turn. 6 mortal wounds on average if you use Fire and Fade over your target. 9 mortal wounds on average if you manage to use Phantasm on top of it, which is really cool. I like movement abilities that can do this. Oh, by the way, there's another YouTuber by the name of Phoenix Gaming. His name's Chris. He has a channel on YouTube. You can check him out. I'll probably do a community post on him eventually. He has a Ynnari review that he's come out with recently. And the same thing you can do with the Hornet, you can also do with a unit of Reavers. Reavers have an ability where they basically do the same thing, where they move over an enemy unit and they deal mortal wounds. That would be really good in a Ynnari list. If you add Dark Eldar in there, you add some Reavers, like a squad of 6 or something like that, and you just use Fire and Fade and Phantasm to move over enemy units and deal a lot of mortal wounds. So that's a pretty good strategy as well. I would check out his Ynnari video when you guys get the chance. It's a really kind of refreshing video on his take about different units and stuff like that Ynnari can take. I haven't done a review like this because, quite frankly, I haven't had the chance to play Ynnari yet. So I'm going to need to do that eventually. But in the meantime, you can check out his video. Give him a couple of subs. He's a small YouTuber like me, so he really needs the support, from the community and stuff like that. And he does a lot of Dark Eldar and Ynnari content as well. So if you're into Ynnari, definitely check his channel out. I'll put the link for his channel in the description for you guys. All right, everybody, that's going to be it for today's video. Thanks for watching. Once again, thank you to all my Patreons and supporters who have supported the channel over the last months. Your help has made the channel better and continues to do so. I will leave my Patreon and PayPal links in the description for those of you who want to support the channel further, and thank you so much for those who have. My next video is going to be a community video, basically a community contest about making custom Wraith units and seeing who has the best custom Wraith unit idea. So stay tuned for that. That's going to be out later this week. And have a great weekend or great rest of your week, everybody. See you guys later and have a good one. Peace out.